George Washington began his life in the cave as a common colonial farmer under the unjust rule of the British Crown. Washington served as a general and commander-in-chief of the colonial armies during the American Revolution and later became the first president of the United States, serving from 1789 to 1797. George Washington was born on February 22, 1732, in Westmoreland County, Virginia. He started his life in the cave as part of Virginia's middle class during a time when the British Crown tyrannically ruled over the 13 American colonies. For the most part, Washington was homeschooled. He studied with the local church sexton and then later with a schoolmaster.
At the age of 11, his father died. He was brought up by his half-brother Lawrence and inherited the family's Little Hunting Creek plantation. In 1748, when he was 16, Washington traveled with a survey party that plotted land in Virginia's Western Territory. A year later, he received an appointment as official surveyor of Culpeper County. This experience made him resourceful and toughened his body and mind. This experience also sparked his interest in Western landholdings. By the age of 20, George became the head of one of Virginia's most prominent estates, Mount Vernon.
In December 1752, Washington, who had no previous military experience, was made a commander of the Virginia militia. In the early 1750s, France and Britain were at peace. However, the French military had begun occupying much of the Ohio Valley, protecting the king's land interests and fur trappers and French settlers. Virginia's Lieutenant Governor, Robert Dinwiddie, sent Washington and his troops to set up a post at Great Meadows. Washington's small force attacked a French post at Fort Duquesne, killing the commander, Coulon de Jumonville. This event started the French and Indian War. The French counterattacked and drove Washington back to Great Meadows. Washington surrendered and went back to Williamsburg.
In 1755, Washington joined British General Edward Braddock's army, where he was given honorary rank of colonel. During the fights at Fort Duquesne, Fort Niagara, and Crown Point, Braddock was mortally wounded and Washington had 4 bullet holes of evident bravery in his cloak. In August 1755, at the age of 23, Washington was made commander of all Virginia's troops. As commander, Washington had 700 ill-disciplined colonial troops with no support from Virginia's colonial legislature. In 1757, he was sent home with dysentery, but then returned as commander in 1758. He successfully captured Fort Duquesne and controlled the Ohio Valley. In December 1758, he left the army permanently and returned to Mount Vernon.
In January of 1759, Washington married Martha Dandridge Custis. They had 2 children, John, who was known as Jackie, and Martha, who was called Patsy. Patsy died before the Revolution, and Jackie died during the Revolution. From his retirement from the Virginia militia until the start of the Revolution, Washington devoted himself to the care and development of his landholdings. While he kept over 100 slaves, he was said to dislike the institution, but accepted the fact that slavery was commonplace.
In 1758, Washington was elected to the Virginia House of Burgesses. By the late 1760s, many hurtful acts of abuse of power were imposed on the American colonists by the British. Washington believed that it was in the best interests of the colonists to declare independence from England. This realization marks when Washington finally leaves the cave. No longer, Washington realized, would he allow himself to live in a world where one man rules over everyone else. He attended many political meetings, including the First and Second Continental Congress. By the time the Second Continental Congress convened, the American Revolution had begun. He was appointed Major General and Commander-in-Chief of colonial forces for fighting against Great Britain.
Washington's troops were poorly trained and lacked food, ammunition, and other supplies. However, he was able to give them the direction and motivation to keep going. The worst time for Washington and his army came at Valley Forge in the winter of 1777. With thousands dying due to illness, Washington used his grand stature of immovable disposition for maintaining his army's morale. Over the course of the war, the colonial forces won few battles, consistently held their own against the British. In October 1781, with the help of the French, the Continental forces were able to capture British troops under General Charles Cornwallis in Yorktown, Virginia. Cornwallis surrendered, ending the Revolutionary War. The Americans had won their independence. Washington resigned as commander-in-chief of the army and returned to a depleted Mount Vernon. His days as a brave general of rare skill were over, but Washington still had more to give the nation.
Since winning their independence, America had been struggling under the Articles of Confederation. Therefore, Congress approved a convention to be held in Philadelphia to amend the Articles. At the Constitutional Convention, Washington was unanimously chosen to be president. His decision to represent the new nation as president was perhaps just as important as his choice to help fight to create it. In a sense, it was him coming out of the cave once more. When he was president, he exercised his power with restraint and honesty.
During his first term, Washington attempted to reduce the nation's debt, established peace treaties with the Native Americans, and placed a tax on distilled spirits. In response to the tax, the Whiskey Rebellion formed. Washington summoned local militias from several states to put down the rebellion. Moreover, Washington took command to show that the federal government would use force when necessary to enforce the law. This new exercise of power enlightened the people as to how the new government would function. Washington had finally shown that a strong government could and would be in the people's best interest.
When the French Revolution led to a major war between France and England, Washington wanted to remain neutral, causing friction in his cabinet. In Washington's farewell address, he warned his people to stay away from political parties and permanent foreign alliances. Washington declined to serve as president for a third term, showing that he was not corrupted by the power of the presidency. In March 1797, he turned his government over to John Adams and returned to Mount Vernon, hoping to live his life as a farmer. Washington's last act was to pardon the people in the Whiskey Rebellion.
Upon his return to Mount Vernon, Washington felt a sense of relief and accomplishment. He left the government in good hands, at peace, its debts well managed, and set on a course of prosperity. He ended up bringing the American people out of the darkness by sacrificing the final 3 decades of his life to fighting, winning, and preserving a new and independent nation that he would selflessly become the figurehead of.
On December 14, 1799, Washington died. The news of his death spread throughout the country, and the nation went into a deep mourning. Many towns and cities held mock funerals and presented hundreds of eulogies to honor their fallen hero. The British fleet paid tribute to his memory, and Napoleon ordered 10 days of mourning.
He set many precedents for the national government and the presidency. He was not only considered a military and revolutionary hero, but a man of great personal integrity with a deep sense of duty, honor, and patriotism.
His most important legacy was that he insisted he was dispensable, asserting that the cause of liberty was larger than any single individual.